It became apparent very early this morning is that people were really concerned about the process. A lot of people said they felt the campaign was too long, it was too negative, and not enough of the issues were covered.
Thanks, Ed, and we'll be coming back to you very shortly. Right now, Mike Wallace, who's been keeping an eye on the tone of the campaign and the messages of the campaign. So far, Mike, it's been almost all negative. Why is that?
Dan, you youngsters have been talking a lot about negative campaigning the past couple of months, but we oldsters know it's an old and hallowed American tradition. 1884, Grover Cleveland. His opponent, James Blaine, used to shout, "Ma, Ma, where's Pa? Gone to the White House, ha, ha, ha," about Grover Cleveland's bastard son. Or Lyndon Johnson, "Hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today?" Now that is negative campaigning. Compare that with the namby-pamby, "Hey, Michael Dukakis, you're an L word. You're a card-carrying member of the ACLU." Fact of the matter is that negative campaigning used to work, it still works, and I'm afraid we're going to see more of it in elections to come, Dan.
Thanks, Mike. We're seeing it not only in the presidential election of this year, but also in those Senate races, in the gubernatorial races, and in the races for the House of Representatives. Let me pause right now and say to you that our CBS News estimates are that George Bush is off to his expected good early start in the South and along the eastern seaboard and in Kentucky and Indiana. We've yet to see major results from the Michael Dukakis 18-state strategy area. The votes in and tabulated at this moment. This is the board we're going to try to show you quite a bit of during the evening. Now we've edged up to 2% of the precincts in and reported. Votes actually counted, Bush leading by Dukakis by the margins that you see there. Also want to mention to you that any time there's a new result to be had, a new result comes in, or we have a new CBS News estimate, we'll break into whatever it is we're talking about and tell you about it. We want to establish early on in the evening that that's going to be the tone, the direction of our broadcast. We want you to have accurate returns, fast returns, put forward to you in a clear, concise way, and if it takes breaking into a conversation along the way, we'll do that. Now, 12 governorships up nationwide today, 2 races with poll closings at this hour, New Hampshire and Vermont. First, in New Hampshire, our CBS News estimate is that Representative Judd Gregg, the Republican and the son of a former governor, has beaten lawyer Paul McCracken in the race for the governorship in New Hampshire. Now, this is to take over the seat being vacated by John Sununu, who hopes to be part of the Bush cabinet. In Vermont, while we don't know yet whether George Bush, as expected, has carried Vermont, in the Green Mountain State, our CBS News estimate is that when all the votes are in and finally counted, Governor Madeline Kunin, seeking her 3rd term, will have gotten it, beating off State Representative Mike Bernhardt. Now, Leslie Stahl will be keeping an eye throughout the evening on these important gubernatorial races and on the races for the House of Representatives, all 435 seats up in the House tonight. One question we'll be examining is whether either candidate, Dukakis or Bush, has any coattails in these gubernatorial races. Anything we can tell them so far, Leslie, about that?
Frankly, no. The 2 races that we have called so far, New Hampshire and Vermont, were fully expected. As you said, Dan, in New Hampshire, a Republican has replaced the retiring Republican governor. In Vermont, the incumbent Democrat has won. What's interesting in Vermont is that Madeline Kunin has made history tonight. She is the first woman ever in our country to have been reelected as a governor to a 3rd term. So she makes history in Yankee, Vermont. What's also interesting in Vermont, they may be making history in another way, is that in their at-large congressional seat, the socialist mayor of Burlington, who is running as an independent, is in a very tight race according to our exit poll, actually slightly ahead of the Republican candidate Peter Smith, the former lieutenant governor, and the Democrat Peter Poyer is way behind. The socialist mayor of Burlington is slightly ahead, as I said. The last time a socialist was in Congress was in 1948, Vito Marcantonio. So Vermont, Yankee, kind of ornery, they could be making history. It's too early to talk about coattails, Dan. And we'll also be looking to see what happens to governors who raise taxes.
And Leslie, let's note that Vermont is a state where the polls have closed, but our map, while showing a lot of red for George Bush, no blue yet for Michael Dukakis, does show Vermont still white, which means that while the polls have closed in Vermont, we're not yet certain what the outcome is going to be there. Keep in mind that Vermont is one of the states in Dukakis' 18-state strategy of seeding the South and the Rocky Mountain West to Bush, but beating him with Vermont and some of the big industrial states in the upper Midwest and Washington, Oregon, and California, some of that combination. So while we're watching Vermont to see how it goes, we're also getting ready to keep a close eye on Ohio, where the polls will be closing in about 15 minutes in Ohio. So that's the storyline and part of the drama building right now. When we come back, if we don't have any new results for you, we'll be talking to Charles Kuralt. So stay here with us. At CBS News election headquarters in New York, our CBS News estimates are that George Bush has already carried New Hampshire, South Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, Florida, along with Indiana and Kentucky. The polls have closed in Vermont. We don't know the outcome there. You know, H.L. Mencken once said that a national campaign is better than the best circus ever heard of. Bill Whitaker has been traveling with the Dukakis, part of that circus, for these many months. And Bill joins us now from Boston. Bill, what's the talk there at Dukakis headquarters? They think they can carry Vermont, a small state but an important state to them, if they're going to make that 18-state strategy work.
Well, Dan, right now the Dukakis campaign insists its big state strategy of winning a majority of the big states is still doable. In fact, they say they can still pull off an upset by losing some of the big states like Ohio, Texas, and New Jersey, but they would have to make it up in smaller states, which right now don't look very good for them. It's a very tight schedule, and to show how tight things are, Dukakis went live by satellite through the Midwest this evening, urging voters in that crucial region to get out the vote one last time. Dan?
Bill, they have to be worried about Ohio, where the polls are about to close, and the Bush people have been talking so confidently about Ohio.
Well, they are worried about Ohio, but they're telling us that they're not. They're saying that they can piece together enough states around Ohio that can make up the difference. But as I said, those states look even worse for them than Ohio, so it seems like it's a very long shot.
Long shot, but they could offset Ohio with someplace like Texas. We'll keep posted as the evening goes along. Thanks, Bill. Eric Ingberg is in Houston after covering the last days of the at least equally wild and woolly Bush campaign. Eric, are they worried about any state?
Dan, I would put the order of priorities on that as being Ohio, which you just mentioned, as being a state that if it went for Dukakis would really give them the shivers here in Houston, Texas. After that, I think they're concerned about Michigan. Bush was there on his last day of campaigning. And then the third state that I think they'll be watching very closely tonight is the state of Colorado, which is part of the Bush base in the Rockies, but it's the one shaky state in the Bush base.
Thanks, Eric Ingberg. We'll be back to you a little later on. Well, Bill Plant is at the White House where Ronald Reagan is watching all of the returns. Bill, what an incredible career Ronald Reagan has had. From Warner Brothers and the MGM Lion to the Presidential Seal, this is part of his continuing last goodbye. He campaigned very hard for George Bush, which Eisenhower, for example, didn't do for Richard Nixon.
Well, that's right, Dan. You talk about the grind of this campaign. I don't think anybody had a better time in this campaign over the last 2 months than Ronald Reagan, who campaigned 25,000 miles since September and had a wonderful time doing it. And why? Because he sees it as a referendum on his 8 years, and he also is looking at a place in history if he becomes the first president in 150 years to bring his vice president into office after him. And he also is acutely aware, they tell me, Dan, that after he left the governor's office in California, the job went to a person he describes as a liberal. And he saw a lot of what he did wiped out. He doesn't want to see that happen again.
And we should have mentioned it earlier, Bill, what a good point, that not since Martin Van Buren in 1836 as a sitting vice president succeeded to the presidency. One of the things we're watching tonight is to see whether George Bush, with Ronald Reagan's help, can do it. Thanks, Bill. I want to show you very quickly, if we can, how the actual tabulated vote is coming along. This is a board, as I mentioned before, we want to show you pretty often through the evening. Only a few of the precincts reporting 2%. George Bush leading some 58 to 42%. As the evening goes along, of course, these numbers will build. Our CBS News estimates run well ahead of this, but we want to show you these actual votes counted, partly as a way to remind you that if you're a registered voter and you haven't voted, please get out there and vote and then come back and watch our coverage. Charles Kuralt is with us now. Charles, you've been traveling those two-lane blacktop roads, the back roads, and drinking a lot of coffee under a lot of water towers. What are people talking about? Has this campaign made much of a dent in folks talking?
There hasn't been much enthusiasm out there in the country, I think, but I was just thinking, Dan, tonight feels different to me. This, after all, is the great feast day of freedom, and millions of Americans don't want to be left out of it. Somebody gave me a list of the places from which our own